guys, welcome back to a Frame a Day workout with Helen Chen. Today we're going to be doing a shot from Seven Samurai. So I tried to structure this course to go from black and white to color, but realized, this late that I hadn't chosen something from this movie, and I had to change that. And I chose this shot because it's such a great example of kind of storytelling and the type of compositions that are prevalent in but like a lot of the Kurosawa films. And another reason I chose this is because I know I'm very, I'm a widescreen lover. I love, the wider the screen, the better. Not really, but like I love how cinematic widescreen presents. And I just wanted to choose something that still works so well and feels so cinematic, but in this kind of more 3/4 or a 3:4 ratio of frame. And Kurosawa does that in spades. A lot of his movies are has such an interesting breakup of shapes. And what I love about them is how unique they are and how actually graphically inspired they are by just what's inherent in, Japanese architecture almost. Like he almost, in a lot of his shots in his movies, there's almost like a grid-like or pattern-like breakup in many, in a lot of his shots. And they always remind me of like Japanese architecture and those kind of, those horizontals and straights of the screen doors. He always ends up choosing a frame that really celebrates, like especially interior spaces, that quality. And he's also just so great with, where he choreographs all of his actors, especially in a movie that has to deal with so many actors and ensemble cast like Seven Samurai, like having them all kind of like line up or be positioned in a group and having it feel like very organic and natural, but still composed is really, really hard. And he's just really fantastic at it. Like one of my favorite shots, actually, besides just all of the interior kind of like group shots, where he kind of like very purposely composes people, is actually at the end of this movie. There's like all of these mounds and they're kind of equally spaced. They're basically the graves of people, and at the bottom he places 3 characters and they're just perfectly spaced and they're graphically kind of like making sense with the graves and the markers and the mounds, and it's just perfectly placed for this aspect ratio, which is really hard to do. Like if you've ever had to do any composition or design for an illustration or a film frame, having something more square is always harder, for me anyway, to kind of like come up with something dynamic and interesting, but still like, works. And this frame I feel like just does such a great job. It's such a great moment. It's like this comedic moment almost, like you can tell what's happening. You don't need anybody to explain to you what the story is in this moment. You have this dark doorway. You have the figure holding the stick, is light over dark, super shape driven. And then you have these 2 characters framed by the doorway coming forward, and everything is kind of designed for black and white. Like sometimes I look at older movies that are in black and white from other sources, like whether like I can think of some sitcoms and some older kind of like black and white films that just aren't as cleanly designed as this frame. Like the values sometimes, especially when you're shooting like a space with a lot of objects, having all of those objects either, like one common problem I think I don't like is when a lot of the values of objects kind of blend together and the figure no longer silhouettes. And so I think Kurosawa does a really great job of making sure that that doesn't happen, that everything always reads. And so he's always placing like objects that are either of darker or lighter value in front or behind, or like behind characters, so that the characters can always stand out. So I think that's the most important kind of part of what you're doing when you're designing for a black and white film. Like too often you can see objects, but because of the limited value range, you can't even tell what they really are. And here he just makes sure that, like letting things recede and be kind of just grouped together rather than like individual items, you know. Another of my favorite shots from this movie is one of the ones where all of the samurai are perched on top of this rock, and they're kind of like all one shape with the rock against the sky. And it's just like so wonderfully composed, like who's standing, who's sitting, who's overlapping. And it's just, I mean, really would have chosen that to paint. But I've just felt like Seven Figures were a little bit harder to deal with. And the feeling of that one, if I were to kind of like graphically break it down, is really just two shapes, you know, the sky and then the samurai and the rock all form kind of their own thing, and it was a little bit less interesting. But I really would encourage you guys to watch this movie and just take special attention to how he composes the frame, how he breaks it up. There's a lot of shots like this one too, where he's almost using like, it almost feels like a grid, where he's breaking up the frame in like either thirds or fourths, or, you know, and there's always, and sometimes the way he breaks it up has like I mean, I always kind of laugh a little bit when people bring up the golden ratio, just because they tend to bring that up all the time. But he really does kind of benefit or use it to like its most useful form in film is to, like, for example, this one, he's got the doorway and it's not perfectly cut in half, you know, it's like, it's not even really 2/3, it's more like, I don't know, like 5/8 or something, you know, but like just the way that he's broken up the whole frame into smaller and smaller pieces feels like that kind of a, you know, like theory of like a golden ratio, or like continuously shrinking and subdividing, you know, a frame. So he's really good at that. Now I'm finally getting to paint this figure on the right here. I love this frame and the storytelling here. It's just so clear. You know, it's actually kind of like drawing parallels for me to like silent films, where the action has to kind of make up for all of the storytelling, and the clear body language has to say so much about the story and at that time. And that's what makes this frame so cool, is that it's just so clear in that sense. Like, it almost feels like this is a frame from a silent movie, and it's like a gag, you know, that they have to get the story point across. You know, like I love how this guy, he looks so uncomfortable, but he's just got enough face peeking out there. His arms are up. It's like an exaggerated pose to tell the story, but it's not a natural or comfortable one. Like, it's clearly choreographed just for this shot. And that's kind of what I like about his work, is how he communicates story with people and compositions, and like in some ways it can feel like on the nose, but it just works so well and it's so clear. And that's, you know, the most important thing to me when I'm doing any sort of viz dev is the point of the painting I'm doing clear, like what the information I'm trying to get across. Is it about the character in this moment? Is it about the environment? Or is it about the emotion? Like, you kind of have to pick one. Not always, like, you don't have to, but I personally like to, because I don't believe that the entirety of a movie can be represented in one film, like one frame. So why try? A frame is like a movie is broken up anyway. And so I think that this is the perfect amount of information for this shot in this moment in time. And that's kind of what I take away from a lot of Kurosawa's work and a lot of his shot and composition choices. Because the values are so crunched, I am going to try and get a little bit of detail in the darks of this wood and give it a little bit of feeling like there's some wood like pattern there. I just feel like I just love, usually, like, you know, you could leave it out too, but in this moment I was kind of like, I really like how the frame is being divided by this frame, this rectangular frame, and then within that dark part that the figure on the right is silhouetted against is more, you know, rectangular breakups of frame just from the door. And it just feels like this kind of like recurring design motif that I can embrace. I just love also just the, like, even though they're not perfect, they're like home, you know, made and feeling like rustic. There's all these like horizontals and verticals even in the backgrounds, like with that opposing slatted roof behind the two figures. They make kind of a rectangular shape across the frame. The dark underside of the roof of this doorway is making a darker shape. And so if you squint down, there's like this repetitive kind of like breakup of rectangles in this composition. And so I just decided to really celebrate that and making that clear. So that's why I'm kind of even going into this dark door and getting those rectangles, which are not, you know, verbatim what's in the reference image, but the feeling of that in there, because I feel like that's an important part of this image. Like if there was a theme, overall design theme for this composition, it would be kind of like rectangular breakups. And it really helps too with the costuming, just by the nature of the clothing that the two men, especially in the doy, are wearing, with being kind of like cut off bluntly at the bottom there, they even as figures present as almost rectangular shapes, and it just adds to the graphicness of this frame. I'm kind of leaving everything that's in the doorway to be done last, just because, you know, when you really look at it, there are quite a few small little details there. But I don't want to go too crazy and focus too much on it, because I don't want to break up that overall, like, shapes, rectangular shapes that I was talking about before. And I feel like if you go too much into it, sometimes it can be disrupted. So it's just finding a balance of like the most, the least amount of strokes and information, but still keeping the overall idea. You know, it's like it's sometimes I relate it to kind of what happens. Like yesterday we were talking about 2001 and painting faces. Sometimes I find that if you over render and you try and get every little color change or something, a lot of times it just feels like it's too much, and there's too many little details for you to then focus on, and you lose sight of the whole. So that's what I'm really trying to avoid here, especially with this part of it. I just want the figures to read well. I want the overall kind of like blocky break up of this composition to read well, and those are my two main priorities. So here I am, you know, just dealing with the figures, and it's a little bit tough because there are, you know, some small shapes happening here that, you know, with the light hitting the side, there's some patterning, there's overlapping of limbs and clothing. So it's a little bit better to try not to not even, you know, try to get every little detail correct right off the bat. I like to make kind of like larger decisions to make sure that the figure reads and stands alone and well in my studies if I need to. And so that means just being a little bit smarter about, or a little bit more picky about what shapes to put down. Like, especially when it comes to something with a pattern, maybe it's omitting the pattern altogether and just getting the light and the dark sides. Maybe it's, you know, instead of getting every crease in the coat, making it one shape so that the creases don't interrupt the shape and then start looking just like scratchy lines, versus what it's supposed to, read as. So again, the purpose of these studies have never really been about accuracy. It's more about design and readability and clarity and thinking through choices. And so I would take this opportunity to think about that when you're, trying to get these figures down, is what to, put in and what to leave out, and what's really important. So now that I have basically both figures laid in, now I can kind of go through and think, okay, what else can I do here? One, to make the characters stand out against the background, and two, and now's the time to go in and add some of those small details maybe you omitted earlier, for readability's sake, because you have a more accurate judge of, like where to put it, and if it'll like compete or if it will help, like that's why I leave a lot of I like to do all of my details in like different passes, like big shapes first, then medium shapes, then small shapes, not like mechanically or super like regimented at all, but just in general, I try to like start out pretty broad and get some of the larger shapes down, and then layer in the details as I go to figure out what level is appropriate and what still looks good. So just a few more small finishing touches, and that's about it for me on this image. Thank you guys for hanging out another day, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.